Hello and welcome to May 26th, where we're reading 1 Kings chapters 1 and 2. Now, this couple of chapters waves goodbye to David and hello to Solomon because Solomon is now going to be the king. David is unfortunately very old, and so he is about to pass away, and he really needs to pass on the crown before he goes, making sure his heir is made apparent. And so he calls Solomon to be his heir ultimately. He gets convinced to do that. He was supposed to do that, and through a little bit of a complicated handoff, he overlooks one of his other older sons and lets Solomon have the reins instead. Of course, that doesn't exactly go smoothly. And so the first chapter really deals with some of those issues. There's a man named Adonijah. He is David's third or fourth born. I forget exactly which. He's the older son he's the one who's supposed to inherit. He's the first in line after a couple of David's sons have now died because they killed each other back in 2 Samuel 13 and 14. Anyhow, Solomon is trying to be the king. He's supposed to be the king, but Adonijah tries to take his place. And so David says Solomon's the king, but Adonijah gathers some people. He gets a little army for himself. He gets a little religious support for himself, and he declares himself the king. And so it's Solomon versus Adonijah, and the questions are, who exactly is going to win? And of course, it is Solomon. In the end of chapter 1, those things work out that Solomon becomes the king, and Adonijah kind of gives up, although it's not going to be as smooth as you like. You'll see that in chapter 2, because in chapter 2, what happens as David is dying, he starts giving Solomon some words of wisdom from his deathbed, and he says, basically, Solomon, you need to be responsible, you need to follow God, and also you need to kill the people who are causing trouble for your reign right now. If you want to be the king, you have to kill the people who are getting in your way, and unfortunately, that kind of does end up including Adonijah. Adonijah in chapter 2 in verse 13 makes this request to try and marry one of David's concubines, or almost concubines, and it's very confusing, but it is essentially a ploy for the throne to try and get a child who is closer to the bloodline of David, closer to who should be the king than Solomon is. It's a very underhanded thing to do, and so Solomon ends up having to execute Adonijah. Or he doesn't have to, but he does. Solomon banishes Abiathar, who's the priest who helped Adonijah try and solidify his reign. Solomon executes Joab, who is, I believe, his uncle or his cousin, maybe someone who's family to him, the commander of David's army, but he was a pretty bad guy sometimes, and so he gets executed. And then ultimately Shimei, the one who made fun of David and cursed David in God's name when David was kicked out by Absalom, thus making Shimei a false prophet, Shimei ends up getting executed as well. Solomon solidifies himself at the hands of bloodshed, but ultimately this will lead for a long reign of peace for Solomon. And that's where we'll pick up with him next week. Not next week. We'll pick up with him tomorrow in 1 Kings 3 and 4.